Hello, everybody.
Hey, Mr. Pond
Pond Boss.
Tell me how. Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, let's do it now. Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, you're the one that makes fishing so much fun. Well, I woke up this morning and I headed for my pond. Meet Mr. Pond Boss, yeah, we're gone.
Hello, everybody. Bob Lusk here, the Pond Boss. Looks like we got Dick Tabbert, Jason Nepstad checking in already, John Funk from Michigan. Welcome, guys. We're going to have a pretty fun, lively discussion tonight. I want to talk about some of the finer points of growing trophy fish. Anything from channel cat to great big largemouth bass to the biggest bluegills on the planet. So sit back, let's have a fun time, and let's just see if we can carry off and talk about some of these different fun things. I see Leonard Weaver checking in. Now, you guys that have watched the show know the drill. Please type hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section. Click like and share the video. If you'll share this video to your timeline and click like and hashtag Pond Boss Magazine, then you're going to be eligible to win a Pond Boss cap and a Pond Boss mug. Speaking of which, our dear friend, Fred Bingaman from Brownstown, Illinois. Fred, we've known Fred a long time. He is the winner this week. So, Fred, congratulations, man. I'm glad to see you there. We're going to talk about a number of things about how to manage your lake for trophy fish. You know, now, trophy fish can be a consequence or they can be a target. And I think that you need to decide just exactly how you want that to go. So I'm going to tackle that stuff. And of course, I like to figure out here, I want to take a look here on my laptop so I can see who all is checking in. Leonard Weaver, Cassie Cleaver. Let's see who else we got there. Clint Loveday. Clint, got your email today. Didn't have time to answer it, but I will. I might even put that in the Pond Boss Magazine, Ask the Boss. So if, for you guys that aren't a subscriber yet, you need to do that. $35 a year. That's all it costs to subscribe to Pond Boss. So please do that. It's $35 a year. It's cheap. Cheap. So let's tackle some of these topics. John Mikulik, Todd Stegner. Let's see. Holy cow, we got lots of folks joining in already. We got 25 people online so far. Jesse Wookie, Philip Wildman. Philip, I don't know if you heard your song or not, but I played it right there at the beginning, man. So thanks for joining me tonight. I want to talk about some of these topics and see if I can allay a few myths and just bring some common sense into what it really takes to grow some huge fish. So to kind of really start off this conversation, I think the easy way to talk about it. Hey, Frank, James, I noticed that you asked a question, but I can't see it because it's somewhere else besides what I'm talking about. So if you want to pitch that in here, I'll see if I can tackle it. Eli Bridges, good to see you, Eli. Bill Russell. Here's where I want to start. I want to talk about water first. You know, we take water for granted sometimes, and it kind of depends on where you are. I was out in West Texas last week for a couple of days. Really fun. I got to talk to a bunch of county extension agents, and of course a lot of folks, that's the first line of defense, is to figure out, to solve some of the problems. They'll call their county agent first, the county extension agent. Almost every county in the United States has an extension agent that is funded through the extension service through a land grant university. Well, in Texas, it's funded through Texas A&M University, so every county in this state has a county agent. So when somebody has a question, they'll typically call the county agent first, or the NRCS, or the Parks and Wildlife Department, NRCS, Game and Fish Commission, your DNR. So I had a little bit of time to talk to a number of these county extension agents. So that was pretty fun. And what struck me out there in West Texas is one of the agents said, I don't get a lot of pond questions because it hasn't rained out here. Well, out where in the desert area, western parts of states such as Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, areas like that where water is more of a commodity than a luxury, then it's people out there appreciate their water, I dare say, more so than people who get 60 inches of rain a year. So the questions they have are totally different. But the one thing I want to tell you about water is don't take it for granted, because we only borrow it. We only keep water for just a short period of time. Let's see here. Bill Russell. Hey, Bill. Jaden Roberts. Jennifer Royce. John Henry. Frank James. Bob, we know largemouth bass learn to avoid lures pretty quickly when subject to fishing pressure. Unfortunately, this trace is passed along to the next generation as well. Yep, I'm going to talk about that here in a minute, Frank. And if I forget it, tag me back up there. I think I'll remember that. So what I want to tell you about water is that water where you are is not the same as water where I am, which is not the same as water is 50 miles east of me, 50 miles west of me. So even though we look at water in the terms of the wet stuff, H2O, there's way, way, way more to it than that. What's dissolved in the water, and better yet, what's not dissolved in the water, affects it as a medium to grow really, really huge fish. And here's what I mean by that. For people that are in acidic water conditions where the water is static, where it's not moving, like Richmond Mill Lake over in North Carolina, near Laurinburg, North Carolina, they had giant rains with Hurricane Florence. Well, one thing you can pretty well bet is the water chemistry didn't change much in that lake. But in acid lakes where the acidity is between 5 and 6, 6.5, that water pH can fluctuate quite a bit through the course of a day based on its alkalinity and what's living in it. Now, here's what I mean by that. What lives in water, feeds in the water, grows in the water, affects the chemistry of the water. So you know that if you mow the grass and you shoot a bunch of grass clippings out in the water has to process those grass clippings. Well, depending on the chemistry of that water, it can digest those plants with no impact on the chemistry, or it can digest those plants with big changes in the chemistry. So one of the things that we're looking for when we're trying to grow really, really big fish in reasonable numbers is to keep our water autonomous or consistent. And one of the best ways to do that is with aeration and monitoring the chemistry. For example, if the pH of water is 7.0, that's perfect. That's perfect. Actually, a pH between 6 and 8 is perfect. That's what we want. And if the pH fluctuates through the course of a day, let's say the pH in the morning is 6.3, odds are pretty high that it can drop below that in the afternoon and then shoot up way past that in the middle of the night. Or even vice versa. It can change just based on the biology of what's going on with what's living in it. So here's the bottom line. The better you can manage the medium of water and keep it consistent, the better odds you have of growing really trophy fish. Now, most people don't even think about that. I think about that all the time. Now, the reason I think about that is when you have a fluctuating pH or fluctuating oxygen levels or fluctuating alkalinity, any of those things that fluctuate through the course of a day, that is stressful to your fish. And if they're more consumed pathologically and physiologically with how stressed they are, they're not going to grow like they can. So it's real important to keep your water happy and healthy. Now, I get teased quite a bit for saying happy water, but happy water is a big, big deal. You know, I was talking to somebody, I don't remember who it was, early in the week, and they said, oh, you're the guy that talks about happy water. I don't know what it was. I was at a Pond Boss get-together in Pittsburgh, Kansas last weekend, and somebody says, okay, I got to tease you a little bit because you're always talking about happy water when you write articles and things. Well, you want happy water. You want water that's got the right alkalinity. Now, what does that mean? If your pH is somewhere between 6.5 and 8, and you've got an alkalinity that measures 80 to 150, if you've got a good plankton bloom and a consistent color of water, and the oxygen levels don't fluctuate more than 3 or 4 parts per million through the course of a day, you have happy water. You know, so what that means is you got to monitor the water. So if you really want to grow huge fish, I don't care if it's big catfish, big bluegill, big largemouth bass, big Redear Sunfish, whatever it is, you got to really pay attention to your water, because any time that you miss through the course of a day because the water chemistry deteriorates. Even if it's only for 3 or 4 hours, you're not going to have the maximum growth rates you can get out of your very, very best fish. And I'll talk about those very best fish here in a minute. So let's see here. Holy cow, we got a lot of stuff going on. Pierce Johnson, Dave Weber, Northeast Canada. Hey, Dave, good to see you, man. Dave was the guy asking me about happy water. Fancy that. Here we go. Daniel McWhorter, Jeremy Conkright. Jeremy Conkright. What about moving water as in creeks and small rivers? You know, water that's moving has a tendency to be more consistent than water that sits still. Like Richmond Mill Lake, for example, there's 6,000 to 10,000 gallons a minute of acid water, 5.3 pH, flowing over the spillway every day because of the springs that are coming through the sand hills there in North Carolina. I would take that over a pond with perfect pH that sits static, where the pH rises and falls with respiration and photosynthesis any day of the week. I like that a lot. So moving water is actually pretty good. The more the water moves, the more consistent it is. So let me tell you this. Here's a tip. If you want to grow some really huge fish, one of the things you want to do is move the water, whether it's through bottom diffused aeration or it's circulators or whatever. If you want to grow some really, really big fish, move the water. The more you move it, the more consistent the water is, the more stable it is, the better environment it is. So that's a big deal. Richard Dagus, good evening to you, sir. Todd Austin, Mike Rivers, Jeremy Conkright. Happy water means happy fish. You get it. Hey, Dave Weber, did you hear that, buddy? Dave, it was good to meet you too. I enjoyed our conversation. Matter of fact, let me tell you what you did, Dave. With our conversation, you asked me, Dave Weber, listen to this, guys. Dave Weber says, what are the top 5 things that you would think about or do something about if you were going to manage the perfect pond? Well, we had a really nice conversation about that. And Dave, I came back to the house and I thought about that a lot. I wrote an article about that, which will be in the November-December issue of Pond Boss Magazine. Oh, have I told you I'm the editor of Pond Boss Magazine? I know the guy that owns it. $35 a year. You need to join up with that because it's $35. You're going to spend more than that next Friday night on the date with your bride or your husband. Either way. So jump in there. Let's see. Jason Nepstad. Good to see you. David White. Can you produce happy water in a lake? You bet you can. So David White, you're asking me, can you produce happy water in a lake? Now, when you ask me that question, I'm going to presume what you mean is happy water in a lake. I'm presuming you're talking about either a larger private lake or you're talking about a public lake. The more water moves, the happier it is. So if this is a public lake and you live in a cove, if you set up some water circulators, like de-icers, things like that, if you have a way to move water to circulate it, you can create happy water in a smaller zone of a bigger lake. So yes, you can do that. Yes, you can, David White. Good question. So now that I've harped on water for, holy cow, 15 minutes already, the next thing I want to talk about is habitat. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to look at a lake where somebody's really proud of what they've done, and gosh, I'm proud of it too. Hey, Fred Bingaman, you just joined in. Guess what? You're the winner. You won the Pond Boss hat, the Pond Boss mug. It'll be coming at you here in a couple of days when Leanne gets a chance to send it to you. Now, if you guys want a chance at winning a Pond Boss cap and a mug, hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section. Click like and share this video to your timeline. Please do that. And I see a bunch of new people. I'm glad to see that. We got 40 people online, looks like right now, which is outstanding. I saw Peggy Kenyon checking in. Hi, Peggy. Good to see you, dear. Need to get together and have dinner with you and your husband one of these days. Miss you guys. When it comes to habitat, I can't tell you how many times I go look at a pond or a lake that somebody has just built, and they're so proud of it because they've created a point. They've got some structure. They've got some cover. You know, they've got everything that's perfect for that giant largemouth bass. But what they didn't think about was creating habitat for what that bass eats. So one of the real important things to think about, hey, Tim Jackson, good to see you. I'd love to catch up with you, Tim Jackson. I'll be coming to North Carolina here in a few weeks, and I'd love to visit with you while I'm there. The thing about habitat is it takes 10 pounds of bait fish for a largemouth bass to gain a pound, even a bluegill, it takes 10 pounds of bait fish or insects or bugs, wet weight, for a predator fish or a game fish to gain a pound. So the way that you manage your bait fish habitat is a really strong key as to how big your fish are going to get. So that's a key. Another key is the food chain. You got to have the right food chain. So here's the way that works. If a fish misses a meal, it can't really make it up. Now, there is a caveat to that. If a fish doesn't eat for 2 or 3 days, but then has the opportunity to gorge itself, it can make up for what it lost. But one of the finer points of trying to grow big trophy largemouth bass, for example, is you can't let them wallow at 10 to 14 inches for longer than about 2 months. If that's the case, and there's so many young fish like that competing for space, competing for food, then they're going to lose some of their potential, and you'll see that at the other end of their lives. So some of the fish that might have the genetic propensity to get to be well into double digits, if they don't get the food they need with the space to grow when they're in that young span of their life, year and a half old, they can't make that up. So it's real important to give the fish the opportunity when they're young to grow faster. And the way you do that is to provide more food and some culling. That's a big deal. The second thing is, the next thing is genetics. If you want to grow huge fish, you need to pay attention to genetics. I'll always remember a guy from Iowa that bought some Copper-Nose Bluegill, had them air freighted into his lake, and 4 years later they weren't any bigger than about 3/4 of a pound. That's not real big when you compare that fish in southern waters. Well, the problem was Copper-Nose Bluegill are not genetically suited for Iowa or the Midwest. You need strains of fish that are native to that part of the country. There's a lake in central Texas that's gotten to be famous for its gigantic largemouth bass. And the reason is that they stocked the lake with the right food chain, but they also understocked it with some fast-growing largemouth bass, which is a long story, but the bottom line is they were in the right place at the right time to buy the fastest-growing Florida strain bass at a hatchery and stock them into that lake to grow huge. So they got the fastest-growing bass, most of which ended up being females, which is real important, the sex of the fish. If you want to grow huge fish, that's a big deal. So like in bluegill, the males get bigger. In largemouth bass, the females get bigger. So it's real important to know that. That's one of the finer points. And after we talk about water, habitat, talk about the best food and the best genetics, the next point is a good harvest plan. If you truly want to grow huge fish, you've got to selectively harvest the fish that are underperforming, that aren't growing as fast as they should, that are the wrong sex, so to speak. So let's see here. Jeremy Conkright, big heads and small bodies. Nathan Barber, is it true they will only grow as big as the oxygen level will sustain? No, that's actually not true. It's really interesting because here's the way that works. Fish, different species, and let's just take largemouth bass for example. We have tagged a bunch of largemouth bass in the past and studied their movements in a couple of different lakes. One of the most interesting things about that study was that in the summertime, when the water temperature is really high, they would much rather find cooler water, even though the oxygen is just barely high enough to keep them alive. So the temperature is more important than oxygen. So I'm going to tell you this. The temperature of your pond is way more important than how much oxygen's in it. Now, fish have to have enough to live. You don't want your oxygen levels to plummet. But I'll tell you what is hard on fish is if you've got such a heavy plankton bloom and you don't have good buffering capacity, which means your alkalinity is low. If your alkalinity is 20 parts per million or lower, then you're going to see pH fluctuations and you're going to see oxygen fluctuations. It's just as hard on a fish to have too much oxygen as it is to not have enough. Now, to keep it from getting real complicated, here's what can happen in the summertime in a pond. When you've got a pretty reasonable plankton bloom, the plankton, and say your visibility of your water, the water color's green, kind of a light green to an olive green color. If you start checking oxygen levels in the summer, you're going to find that there's going to be times where the oxygen might be 12 parts per million late in the afternoon, and it might be 5 parts per million at daylight. Both of those are stressful. Water, when the temperature is in the 80s, saturation of oxygen is going to be about 7 parts per million, and normal, it doesn't have that much. But when you've got a heavy plankton bloom, the oxygen levels can spike high in the day during photosynthesis at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and it can spike low at daylight, where it could be around 4 parts per million. Both of those are stressful. So as long as the fish have a consistent level of oxygen that's above what it takes to kill them, they're way more interested in temperature than they are oxygen. So oxygen is important, but it's not quite as important as a lot of people might think. As long as they don't suffocate, the temperature is way more important than the oxygen. Now, I don't want you to go away from this saying, well, Bob Lewis says oxygen isn't important. It is important. If they don't have enough to breathe, they're going to be just like us. We'll suffocate. You know, stuff yourself in a freezer and stay there for 2 hours with it unplugged and see how long you last. Same kind of deal. You know, they got to have enough oxygen, but they can withstand low levels of oxygen and choose higher temperature or cooler temperatures in the summertime. That's what they'd rather have. We got Steve Lewis checking in from Hot Springs, Arkansas. Steve, I talked to the fish hatchery guys, and they said that they've got plenty of fish. You know what? I'll give you a call tomorrow. Or better yet, you ring me. I'll be traveling from noon to 5. Call me on my cell. I think you've got that number. If you don't, then email me and I'll call you. Philip Benefield, that comment, Steve Lewis is looking for a few F1 tiger bass. American Sportfish Hatchery has some on sale, and we're trying to work with them to get some of those. If any of you guys want some F1s, private message me and I'll talk you through it and help you figure out how to do that if you want some of them. So let's see, Philip Benefield, hashtag Pond Boss Magazine, you got it. Jeremy Conkrite, I fish a few ponds that are in cow fields. Are cows bad for those ponds? Is them getting in it? Well, it depends on what's on the cows and what's coming out of the south end of a northbound cow. Too much fertility, too much cow poop, cow manure in a pond can create a toxic algae bloom. So even though they may not contribute to it directly, they can contribute to it indirectly. I have investigated a number of fish kills over the years where when you circle back and figure it out, the culprit is that the farmer or the rancher brought the cows into a pen, sprayed them for flies, and they go straight to the pond. Well, the chemical, the pesticide that they spray for flies is toxic to fish. So if you're in that situation, then pay attention to that. Let's see here. Oh, I missed a couple of questions here. I'm going to go back here. Looks like Brandon McGraw, my pond was stocked by the floods in Baton Rouge. I recently dug it out even more. I want to stock it, but I have mud cats. Well, if your ponds were stocked by the floods in Baton Rouge, then you probably need to change it because the fish that come in floods are probably not the fish you want. If you've got mud cats, also called bullheads, I think you probably need to evaluate the different species of fish that you have because that's going to influence how you stock it. It might be wise for you. I don't see how big your pond is, but if it's not real big, then I think it would be smart to go ahead and eradicate the fish that you've got. Do that now. I know it's going to cost you a few $100, but do it. Because if you can get ahead of the curve, if you can take out the fish you don't want and stock with fish you do want and give them a jump start, then you're not trying to unpickle a pickle. If you try to stock a pond around other fish that you don't want, it's going to take a period of time, anywhere from a year to 4 years, to undo what's been done so you can redo what you want. So it would be worth the money spent depending on how big that pond is. If it's just a couple of acres, then that's great. Hey, John Wilson, good to see you, buddy. Let's see here. I want to go back and make sure I've got the questions so far. All right, I'm going to take a minute here. And just before the show, I got a really interesting question here. And this is a real world deal, so I'm going to take you through that. Let's see here. I got a question from one of Greg Grimes' customers from Ball Ground, Georgia. This guy's Johnny McCullum. Johnny McCullum, a couple of years ago, he bought property on a 30-acre lake in northwest Georgia. And just like a lot of guys who were interested in energetic, it didn't take long before he was the president of the Lake Owners Association. So he's been doing some research on how to improve the fishing, and he's been listening to some of these webinars and talking, asking some advice. Well, it looks like Greg Grimes and his team came in and evaluated that lake. And what they decided to do, it looks like they are short on habitat. Real important. Ask them what their goals are, and he said the goals are, let me find it here. The goals basically are, it's a community lake, so they really want a balanced fishery. They want to be able to catch more 3 to 5 pound bass, and maybe a kid can catch a good catfish or a mess of brim, and they want the water clarity to be where people can still feel comfortable swimming in it, and an occasional big bass. Of course so, they do. Hey, Jacob West, driving home from Amarillo. You must be building car washes up in Amarillo. Good to see you, man. Welcome. Kyle Edwards. All right, so now he gave me a couple of pictures that are kind of scary. They shocked up with their electrofishing boat. By the way, for those of you that didn't see last week's show, go back and watch it. That is a very cool show with a lot of visual aids. And some of you guys that watched that show, chime in here and kind of back me up. We were in the shocker boat at Jim Swanson's lake, which is an 11-acre lake not very far away from where I live. Mike Otto built it. I designed it. My company stocked it. And now we're in like the 5th year. And man, there's some very cool things going on in that lake. And we shocked that lake. Now, looking at these pictures of Johnny McCullum's fish, he's showing one bass where the gills look like they're rotten. And it also looks like where the gills attach right up under here has come apart. Well, that fish is real thin. That fish has got a lot of years on it. And he said that visibility was 45 inches back in April, and they decided to buy a feeder and start feeding the fish. He's got a cool idea. One thing I love what he did here. He was having trouble with catfish eating his fish food. So he built a cage with a mesh big enough that the catfish can't get in it, but bluegill can. So he dropped some food down in the cage so the catfish the brim can come in it, bluegill can come in and eat. And it's working really, really well where that fish food is targeted toward bluegills. Because those of you with catfish, you know that when you throw that feed out there, those catfish are going to tear it up and the bluegill may not get a shot at it. Well, feeding the feed in a cage that the bluegill can swim into, even if it's a 4-inch mesh and the catfish are big, that's a pretty smart way to be able to give your bluegill a chance to eat some feed. So I thought that was a brilliant strategy. So he said they've got some grass carp. Looks like they've got some, he's got a picture here that looks like hydrilla, but I'm not sure that it is. If it's hydrilla, that scares me in a private lake because that stuff can grow really, really fast. So his questions to me, let's see, the pH is 7.2. Alkalinity's 10 parts per million. That's too low. Then that might be an explanation as to why the gills are torn up and burned on those fish. The pH at the time that they checked it was 7.2, but I'll tell you this, with alkalinity of 10 parts per million of ag lime, calcium carbonate, you can pretty well bet that pH is going to fluctuate based on the time of day, and that's stressful on fish. So he asked, what are some of the things I can do? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you guys, all of you. If you want to grow some really, really big fish, you need to zero in on the habitat first. Check your water chemistry. And if you need help with the water chemistry, talk to your local pond management pro. He'll help get some samples and then interpret what the chemistry is and what it really means to you about your water. So water's first. Second thing is habitat. If you've got anywhere from 20 to 30% of your pond with the right kind of habitat designed as an underwater community, you're going to be more likely to grow some of those huge, huge fish that you want. Now, growing huge fish Paul Picard says, still alive? Yep, I'm still alive, and the show's still alive, so it is. Christopher Aguilar, we've had too much rain over the last few months. Three months ago, I was crying for rain. LOL, and hashtag never happy. Man, that's the way it is. Feast or famine with the rain, it seems like. Mike Cottrell, my pond seems to stay muddy. Looking at aerating. My pond seems to stay muddy looking, and I'm aerating all night and feeding MVP, and the fish are eating good, and I can see bass topping, but will the water ever clear up? I don't know. I don't know if the water will clear up or not. You know, the thing that, since we're talking about water, get a 1 gallon jar of that water, set it on a shelf in your garage, come back and look at it in a week. If it's clear, then it's physically stirred up. If it's not clear, then you got some colloidal microscopic clay particles that are lighter than water that are keeping it in suspension. And I've seen ponds that when you aerate them, they get muddy. And if that's the case, then you need to change the way you're aerating. Move your bottom, if you're using bottom diffused aeration, move it up into shallower water and set it in an area where it can't stir the mud up so much. You know, maybe put it in I don't know what kind of system you've got, but if you can set it on a platform underwater and aerate from 15 feet up, that might be a smart thing to do. Talk to your pond pro about that and see what kind of answers they can give you. Wherever you bought that aeration system from, call them and talk to them about that, because that could be the problem. There's Mark Dauber checking in from Montgomery, Alabama. Might be passing through your neck of the woods in November. Speaking of that, if anybody, here's what's going on. We're going to go to Richmond Mill Lake in Laurinburg, North Carolina. Got to be there, I think, November 6, 7, 8. Anybody between Whitesboro, Texas, we'll go through East Texas, through Arkansas, Memphis, Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee, into the Carolinas, and then circle back, probably come through Montgomery, Alabama, back through Jackson, Mississippi, central Louisiana. If any of you know of anybody that needs electrofishing services, or you want that pond analyzed, call me or text me or send me a PM or email me, boblusk@outlook.com or info@pondboss.com. We'll talk about what we can do to help you figure out the status of your pond. There's Matt Rail checking in. Are we coming to Indiana? No, we're not coming to Indiana unless we need to. So we ought to have a conversation about that. Nathan Barber, what's the best time of year to electrofish and why? Let's see. I'm going to come back to that question here in a minute. Christopher Aguilar released 48 baby bass 2 weeks ago. All survived. Woohoo! That's good. As long as there aren't any bigger bass, they'll survive longer. Okay, Nathan, what's the best time of year to electrofish and why? There's two good times. Springtime is a great time to see how you fared coming out of wintertime. And what that does is that gives you a really good underwater snapshot for that moment in time to help you decide what you need to do going into the year. The fall is a great time to electrofish a pond. And most of the surveys we do in the fall is to check and see how well that pond fared through the course of the season, through the spring, through the summer, and the fall. Then we check the status. Now, if you've never had a pond electrofished, the best time to do that is in the spring, because that way it's after winter time, you can see where you are. However, if you haven't ever had it electrofished before and you want to do it, fall is a good time as well, because you can get a good starting point in the fall. The only thing that'll be missing by electrofishing in the fall is what happens in the next 3 or 4 months before spring comes. But in the fall, electrofishing really can help you with the dynamics of the fishery to see what kind of survival rate you had, how many size classes of bluegill do you have, what's the body condition of your predator fish, largemouth, smallmouth, walleye, whatever your predator fish are. It's a good time to do it in the fall, and to see if there's some habitat improvements that you can make over the wintertime. Like in northern ponds, if you're lacking habitat, we can figure that out during a survey, then you can start placing structure in the wintertime, even if you do it on top of the ice, and when it melts, it falls down in place. So there's pros and cons about shocking in the fall compared to the winter. What's the average cost to electrofish a 1 acre pond in Ohio? Jason, I'll tell you what we charge. Of course, we're coming a long way, but to do a 1 acre pond, most of the time our minimum charge, We would charge $1,250 to do that. Now, there's other smaller companies than us that don't have the payroll I've got, you know, that don't have the equipment I've got, that can do it with equipment that's not as good as ours, that can charge less than that. And there may be some companies there that will do it for less than that. A 1 acre pond for $1,250, I feel a little uncomfortable charging that much, but I had to get over that because I've got a business to run. But we also charge $1,250 to do a 30-acre lake. You know, because it's not so much about the electrofishing and what you find as how you can interpret that and what it means so you can help that landowner figure out what they need to do with that fishery. That's real important. So let's see here. I think Frank James asked a question down here and I missed it. Someone goes back to it. Oh, okay. Frank says, should I avoid fishing for bluegill and Copper-Nose Bluegill around the feeders, or does it make any real difference? Doesn't make any difference. It really doesn't make any difference. The memory of most fish lasts about 15 minutes. Now, Frank did ask a question earlier about fish becoming hook shy. That happens. And here's the best way to explain that. If you're out there fishing and you're throwing a crankbait and you catch the same fish 2 or 3 times, then you don't, that fish gets a negative reinforcement from that activity. So hook shy fish, that is an issue. And now there's a difference between a fish being hook shy and being prone to being aggressive as a feeder. Aggressiveness is inherited. Hook shy is conditioned. That may be the biggest take-home point for tonight. If you're going to try to grow really huge fish, the difference between hook shy and aggressiveness is an inherited trait. Hook shy is conditioning from too much fishing, overfishing, throwing the same baits in front of the same fish with a negative reinforcement. Every time a fish gets its lip jerked and pulled out and thrown in the bottom of a boat, at some point that's going to condition that fish to not hit that lure. But that doesn't mean that fish won't be aggressive and eat bait fish. It will. It'll grow. You know, so think about that. I don't have an answer for it other than restrict the amount of time that you spend flogging the water. If you've got a small body of water and you fish it every day, at some point your most aggressive fish are going to become hook shy. Now that doesn't mean that they'll stop being aggressive. It just means they'll get hook shy. You know, so what a lot of the pressured lakes do in private waters is allow people to fish 2 days a week, maybe 3 days a week, then let the lake rest. As a matter of fact, that's what Kingfisher does at Richmond Mill Lake. You can fish that lake 3 days a week, maybe 4 days a week, and then they let it rest. And they do that just so they can avoid the fish becoming hook shy, so the catch rates will stay up. So there's your answer, or there's my answer for that little dilemma. I see my wife just checked in. She's going to share that. Here's what Debbie's going to do. She's going to share this video to her timeline, and pretty soon her friends are going to be checking in and saying hello to me. If you don't mind, do that right now. Share this video to your timeline, please. Nathan Barber, what brand of fish food do you recommend and what % of protein is in it? Well, I'll tell you, Nathan, I have been able to spend a lot of my life in the mid-2000s helping Purina Mills design their best fish foods. I am a huge fan of AquaMax fish foods, especially the sport fish foods. The proteins are 42 to 46%. They're fish meal-based proteins. Predator fish need fish meal. And that's my experience. Now, there might be some nutritionists out there that will refute it, but I know what works. I've watched AquaMax. I've grown huge fish. I've grown some bluegills over 3 pounds using AquaMax fish foods. I've grown thousands of bluegills beyond 2 pounds on AquaMax. I've grown excellent bait fish populations to feed bass that aren't feed trained using AquaMax. So I like that feed a lot. John Henry says, 1 month ago I had lots of bluegill and golden shiners feeding. The last 2 weeks they vanished. What do you think happened? Nothing feeds and I've seen no dead fish. John Henry, remind me where you are, but what I'm going to tell you is if you're predator heavy and the predators have figured out that you had bluegill and golden shiners, then they've eaten a bunch of them. That doesn't mean they've decimated them, but it means they've eaten a bunch of them. But I'll tell you something else. As the water temperatures change, fish habits and behaviors change. I've seen fish move from this feeder to that feeder or to that feeder. And when that happens, you just don't see them. They're going to go somewhere else. It doesn't mean they've disappeared. Clint Loveday, do you think that the feed will continue to be improved to push growth? Do you see something taking the place of MVP, which is awesome? No, I don't. Now, I know there's some competitive fish foods out there, you know, and I can't say anything about those because I haven't used them. Those people have approached me, especially Optimal. They've approached me, but I've never used their feeds. They've said, well, we'll send you some to try. That didn't happen. But what I can tell you is I'm real comfortable with the recipes that AquaMax, the Purina, has put together. I endorse them. I like their feeds. I like their marketing plan. I like the availability. If you can't get Purina feeds, you tell me. And Purina is a sponsor of this show. You know, that's how much I like them. I allow them to be sponsors of this show. I don't mind saying no to a sponsor, but I believe in what they're doing. No, I don't know. I don't know of anything that's going to take the place of MVP yet. Now, you know, I remember reading a story that goes back to the 1840s or something, where the guy that was in charge of the patent office decided to close it, or made the proposal to close it, which just may be a wives' tale. I don't know, because everything that needed to be invented has been. Well, you know where we are with that. So I'm not going to tell you that fish food can't be improved. It probably can. But the most complete fish food that I've seen so far is this AquaMax line of fish foods. And it's growing some huge, huge fish. Ben Strange, hey, I love the show. Always feel like I learn something anytime I watch. Well, thanks, Ben. That's great. Jeremy Concride, would love to catch a 3-pound bluegill. Hey, dude, when you see a 3-pound bluegill, I'm telling you, it looks like it's got a football helmet on and its chin comes out past its nose. It looks like, actually, you know, they're about 14 inches long, and they look like they run in the back of a tractor trailer rig. Their noses are, and they're about that thick, you know, so they're huge. They're beastly looking, cool looking fish. Let's see, good gosh, man, I kept thinking I'm going to be talking about growing trophy fish. I'm going to tackle that topic for just a few minutes since I told you I would, but there's a whole bunch of questions popping up that I'm going to handle here in just a second. Okay, so here's some of the finer points about growing huge fish. First of all, you've got to start with the right genetics, with the right habitat. I beat that up pretty good tonight. The best water. Okay, now, once you've got those things in place, you've got to manage the food chain. And the way you manage the food chain is through selective harvest of the predators and keeping your water as productive as you can without compromising water quality. Now, let that sink in for a minute. You can't overfeed. You can't overfertilize. Don't do that. And when I say that, what I'm telling you is don't overfeed the fish and don't overfertilize. If you do those two things, you're going to compromise the water quality. And when you compromise the water quality, nothing else matters. Because at some point, fish are going to die. Or they're going to be so stressed that they stop growing. So you've got to balance the way that you feed the fish and the way that you fertilize the water. So what happens is you get the water productivity up to this point, and then your job is to kind of keep it there without trying to push it to this point and compromise water chemistry. Think of it like this. Water ends up being like a septic tank. Your pond ends up being like a septic tank. You don't want to overload it. If you overload it, it's going to push back. And when it pushes back, that's when you have a problem with fish being distressed, not growing, and ultimately a fish kill, which you only need 20 minutes. Listen to this. You need 20 minutes of bad water quality and the fish die. That's all you need. So paying attention to your water is job one. Now, what are some of the finer points of growing huge fish? Supply the food. If you want to grow trophy channel catfish, for example, keep their numbers down, feed them plenty, keep the water moving, and you're going to grow giant catfish. You can grow giant catfish on fish food. I've seen fish in pretty large private lakes go from 5 or 6 pounds to 16, 17, and 18 pounds in 3 to 4 years with adequate feeding. Because when they're eating all the fish food they want and they're preying in the food chain out there, those catfish are going to grow so fast you won't believe it. Now, if you want to grow really huge catfish, look at blue cats. Blue cats are top-end predators, but they'll also come to fish food. But they make a living eating other fish. I'll never forget, I collected in a gill net one time, a big gill net, in a 20-acre lake. I captured a 52-pound blue cat. 52-pound blue cat. That thing was giant. I mean, I messed up a shirt holding it. It was so big. It just got slime all over my shirt. Well, we decided to butcher that fish because the goal in that lake was to grow big largemouth bass. That 52-pound channel catfish had a 3-pound bass in its gut. Well, the managers of that lake, it was a club lake, they wanted to grow big bass. But the complaint was that people were catching these big blue cat and tearing up their gear. So the mission was, are the blue cat affecting productivity of largemouth bass? And that lake they were. But if the goal was to grow huge blue cat, man, they were there. If you want to grow big bluegills, some of the finer points about that is you have to have a predator fish in there that can control big numbers of over-reproducing of bluegills. So almost every, no, I'll put it this way. Every trophy bluegill lake that I manage has bass in it. Some of those bass are trophy bass. So if you want to grow huge bluegill, you need to feed them. And here's another little tip. If you want to grow 2-pound bluegill plus, feed them all year long. Now that's going to sound contrary because what most people tell you is to feed the fish as long as they'll eat. What I'm going to tell you is they're going to feed like crazy. Bluegill's favorite temperature is anywhere from the mid-50s up into the mid-80s. So above that temperature, they don't feed quite as much, and below that temperature, they don't feed quite as much. But I have seen bluegill coming to feeders when the temperature is 46 degrees, the water temperature. So even though you may not feed as much in the wintertime, maybe just set your feeder to go off for 3 seconds a day, one time. And the best of the best bluegills are going to condition to come eat that fish food. The other thing about trying to grow giant bluegills is you need enough bass of a large enough size to control the reproduction of bluegills. Now, it's easy to grow big bluegills when you have overcrowded bass. But the thing is that you got to pay attention to there is keep in mind that a bluegill is going to live 6 to 8 years in most waters. Now, cooler waters, they'll live longer, but they'll grow slower. So they may live 10 years in the Midwest. They may live 12 years in Chicago. But the bottom line is as long as they've got the right amount of food over the course of their lives, they're going to continue to grow until they reach that point of where they're geriatric. Then they're going to start to decline. So good food, control the numbers of baby bluegills because you don't want them competing with the best of your best bluegills. Here's another little tip. The ones that get the biggest are the males. Do not harvest the biggest bluegill in the pond. Harvest the next size down if you're the one pulling the trigger on taking fish out. Aaron Matos, Phoenix, Arizona. He's grown some gigantic bluegills in a 1/10 acre pond over a long period of time. What he did was once a year, he'd go in and harvest the fish with a seine. He'd pull a net out, he'd take the best of the best, throw them back, take the others, and either eat some of them or contribute them to go be put into other ponds around the city of Phoenix. And because he did that and he kept his feeding program consistent out there in the desert, he grew some bluegills that grew way bigger than 2 pounds in a small body of water. He had such a concentration of big bluegills, it was stunning. But he also had figured out a way to keep his water clean and keep it moving. He would pump the water through some gabled down rocks, flow the water back up across the top of his dam through kind of a wetland stream over rocks to where bacteria could grow to cleanse the water, through a stream bed of plants that would absorb nutrients from the water and push the water back in the pond. So he was continually keeping his water clean, culling his fish. He had good genetics to start, and he fed them well. That's how he's able to grow some really huge fish. What about largemouth bass? Well, one of the tips I can tell you about growing some largemouth bass huge, first of all, they have to be girls. Most of the time, they're Florida genetics. Now, if you happen to be blessed to live north of Mason-Dixon line, your odds of getting Florida strain bass or fish with Florida genetics in are not very high. What that typically means is the top 1% of your females may have a shot at double digits. Probably not, but they may. So, one of the finer points about trying to grow huge largemouth bass is you want to pay attention to and preserve the females, which means you got to learn how to sex fish. You know, you can ask me how to do it. I'm going to tell you, spread their fins and look. In the springtime, they're easy to sex. The females are egg-laden. The males are thin-bellied, typically. You need to be culling males, preserve the best females. And what you'll want to do, now, if you're really serious about growing huge largemouth bass, you're paying attention to their body condition. You're looking at relative weights. Now, here's where it gets complicated. If you're not managing your water chemistry and your water quality, and you don't have the very best food chain, and you haven't paid that close attention to genetics, but you're going to rely on a selective harvest plan, here's your obstacles. You've got to figure out which ones of your fish are the best ones. Those are the ones that you want to preserve. So we've got one lake that we manage for a fella in Fort Worth, Texas. And what we do there is any of his females that have a relative weight of under 120 is coming out. He's got some bass that are 125 to 135. And one of his goals is to grow as many double-digit bass in his 10-acre lake as he can. Well, with limited amount of space, you know, and he's got a great feeding program. The fertility is great. He stocks supplemental forage fish through the course of the year as needed. Then, so his best choice is to be culling the fish that are males, underperforming females, and those which he doesn't think are going to make the cut. Those fish with, say, 115 relative weight, those might be heroes in your lake, but in his lake, they're not. They're not even in the top 30% of all the females that he's got in his lake. Now, the way we figured that out is we have weighed and measured hundreds and hundreds of fish over the last 5 or 6 years. You know, so weigh and measure your fish. That's a big deal. Plot them on an XY graph. Get a comparison. Start to see where your bass are overcrowded. One of the fine points of trying to grow huge fish, cull the underperformers. Cull the young of the year that aren't relative weights, that are above 110 to 115. Be selective about the fish that you leave behind. Go back in every 5 or 6 years. Stock a few F1s or stock a few more Floridas to keep the integrity of the genetics in place to perpetuate the opportunity years and years and years down the road to keep growing big fish. Redear Sunfish, if you want to grow giant Redear Sunfish, preserve some plants. Redear Sunfish feed in aquatic plants because they eat snails. Guess what's the primary habitat for most crustaceans and snails? Small crawfish, small mussels, snails, all that. It's plants. So if you want to grow some huge red ear, you need to have some plants. And if you do that, then your odds of growing some huge red ear go up. What about smallmouth bass? Same thing as a largemouth bass. The difference is smallmouth, they want to have cooler water, and they're real selective about what prey they eat. They love crawfish. They love small sunfish. But if you've got smallmouth bass with bluegill in there and competing with largemouth bass, chances aren't good that you're going to grow some huge smallmouth bass. So it circles back to keeping the water clean, the very best habitat for not only the species that you're targeting, but the species that they eat. If you can do those things with great genetics and a real picky, aggressive, selective harvest program, your odds of growing some really huge fish are going to go way up. So think about those concepts and how that applies to your lake. So now I'm going to see if I can tackle some of this, some of these questions. Okay, Derek McCavitt says, what is the healthy weight to length ratio for a largemouth bass? I don't know what the ratio is, but I'm going to tell you what they are. A 12-inch bluegill should weigh 12 ounces. A 14-inch bluegill is 1 pound 7 ounces. A 16-inch bluegill should weigh 2 1/4. An 18-inch bluegill should weigh 3 1/4. That's the standard weight compared to length of those bass. If your fish are within about 5% of that curve, they're normal. If they're 5 to 10% above that curve, you know, to the upside of that curve, then they're in great shape. If they're 115 to 120, they are on the road to being heroes. Let's see, Jeremy Conkrite, I've heard fathead minnows are great for ponds. True or false? True and false, Jeremy. Pothead. I think I'll take a drink of water on that little slip. Fathead minnows, I hope y'all are laughing at that. Raise your hand if you're laughing. Fathead minnows really have one fundamental role, and that's to jumpstart a brand new stocked pond. Oh, look at all the laughing emojis. I appreciate that. Thanks, fellas. It makes me feel better. That is cute as heck. Oh, somebody put a grumpy one on there. I might find out who did that. It's probably my wife. Fathead minnows' role in private pond management is to jumpstart a brand new stocked lake. I'm going to tell you, I've told this story before. I'm going to hit it one more time real fast. Fathead minnows cost about $10 a pound, and they get eaten just within days of being stocked into an existing pond with bass in it. They're not a good choice. It'd be money better spent to buy fish food. Dick Tabbert, water temperature in the 60s, still plenty of fish at the feeder. That's perfectly normal. I would hope that. Holy cow, 726. This has flown by. Nathan Barber, we have roughly a 5-acre lake. How many feeders do you recommend? 2. 2 feeders for a 5-acre lake. We're currently running only one and enjoy watching the fish feed on a nightly basis. With one feeder, I'd set it to go off 3 times a day, 8 hours apart. Even if it's in the middle of the night, fish are going to come eat. Jason Nepstad, any idea how far bluegill travel to a feeder? It seems like all the fish feeding live within 10 feet of my feeder. I'm going to tell you this, bluegill will probably move 75 to 100 feet tops. So you're going to have kind of like the house covey of bluegill that come to the feeder, and some of that's going to be contingent on how much feed you're feeding. If you feed those bluegill to satiation where they're full, they're not going to come back to the feeder and eat just because it goes off. So, you know, one of the strategies I've used in the past is to set a feeder to go off, maybe for 10 seconds, then give it 15 minutes, go off again for 5 seconds, give it 15 minutes, go off for 2 seconds. That brings in different size classes of bluegill. The good thing about MVP fish food, AquaMax, is that it's got 9 different pellet sizes, which means that some of those pellets sink or slowly, so you're feeding fish beneath those most aggressive fish. I like that. Speaking of that, thank you to Texas Hunter for being a sponsor of this show. I didn't have it done that yet. Kyle Edwards, I've lived on my 12-acre lake for 20 years, and I can't remember finding a single large bass that just died for no reason. How long can a bass live, and are they dying and something is eating them before I see them? Most large fish are put back to grow when they're caught. We keep most of the fish under 13 inches. That sounds like a good plan. It's not unusual to not see a dead bass, because what happens is once they become geriatric, they begin to lose weight, and as they lose weight, they get lethargic and they don't move around quite as much. And it's not unusual for one to die, and before it floats, especially in the summertime, which is the most stressful time, turtles will eat it. You know, but it's also not unusual for you to see one float up from time to time. If a fish floats up and it's dead, floats up, buzzards are going to get it as soon as it floats to the shore. Turtles are going to gnaw on it before it even gets to the shore, and if they gnaw on it enough to puncture the air bladder, it's going to sink and won't come up. Paul Picard, one of the early Pond Boss magazines, had a great article on growing large bluegill. Are reprints available? Hey, Paul, thanks for asking that question. We have got all the back issues of Pond Boss magazine available. If you go to pondboss.com and click on the resource guide, click on the library or the store, you can go back and see all the back issues, or call the office, 800-687-6075, and the girls in the office can help you with that. But yes, we have back issues that can be ordered. We do have some articles that are separate that we've pulled out. Not a lot of those, but we can. So here's your resources for Pond Boss. You've got the Pond Boss website, discussion forum, a lot of resources at www.pondboss.com. On this Facebook page, all of our videos. Actually, I've just started some audio podcasts. There's one up, and I'll be recording those as well, so you can listen to those in the car as you go down the road. But with Bob Lusk Outdoors, bobluskoutdoors.com, I've got a lot of free articles and things there. And so you've got a lot of resources. The Pond Boss resource guide, if you want one of those, it's online, or you can call the office and we'll send you one. Scott Lindsay, we're running out of time here, guys. Joseph Reynolds joined in. Kyle Edwards, thank you. You're welcome. Scott says, I've recently widened my pond, raised the dam, and I'm in the process of raising the water level about a foot. Anything I need to be aware of going into cooler temperatures, or am I going to be okay? Pond looks great now. You're probably going to be okay. The one thing, when you raise the dam, I hope that you tied that dirt in real well with the clay that was under the topsoil on the top of your dam, or it'll seep. But that's the only thing I can think of. I think it's a great idea to do it. Johnny McCollum. Johnny, we talked about you earlier. I hope that you got to hear it. He says, how many turtles are too many? You know, if a fish gets eaten by a turtle, the fish deserved it. You know, now if the turtles are feeding on your fish food, that might be an issue for you. And you can trap them live and haul them somewhere else or show them their Second Amendment rights. But I don't really see turtles as a problem. I see them as part of nature. So, hey, listen, it's 7:30 already. Thanks for listening. We've got all kinds of resources at Pond Boss. We've got Mike Otto's Just Add Water for those of you thinking about building a pond. We've got another book, Perfect Pond, Want One. This is about people that are looking to buy land, build a pond, and have the best pond they can have. Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year. We'd love to have you join up. And hey, thanks for listening. Now, next Wednesday, I'm going to be in Houston. I've called several people today to try to be my guest for that show, so I'm going to find somebody and have a guest next week. I'm not sure who it is, but once I get that figured out, then I will let you guys know. So thanks for sharing the video. Thanks for hanging out with me. And until next time, adios.